All right.
All right.
All right. Between me and Emma from the last blam, we have worked out what the issue was.
What was the issue?
So I got a message from Emma last night saying, "Oh my God, I'm catching up on your episodes."
Oh.
She can't listen to our podcast when she's got like the kids in the car. So there's only certain times, like I suppose all our listeners, there's only certain times that you can listen to inappropriate content in front of children. So yeah, so she's catching up where she can. So she said, I've caught up to episode, let me check. Caught up to episode 66, and Sarah mentions the blam about Australia and the moon. And ever since you told me, since the last episode, ever since you told me, it's really been bothering me. And I thought, oh, why didn't I remember that? It's really irritating me. Like, have I got severe memory loss or something? I couldn't work it out. And I was really bothered. And I thought, then maybe maybe I am actually getting proper memory issues. And I thought, oh, that's going to be a nightmare, although I won't remember.
I feel like you've thought well too much into this.
I know, but it really bothered me, and I thought,
Is
why
it the
didn't I
start of
remember
dementia?
that?
Can't
Yeah,
even-
exactly. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'm losing my fucking mind. Considerably bothered about
You're
it.
stressed.
Yeah. And then Emma sent me a message saying it was the 2 episodes that you weren't there, meaning me. And I said,
was it?
oh, okay, that makes sense. So yeah, so that's when my dad passed away.
Oh, that's why.
And I wasn't here, and you took the whole thing for like 2 whole episodes, and I was not here. So as soon as she said that, I was like, okay. So I didn't get that. Although I listened to your episodes, I wasn't in
listening to them, yeah.
I wasn't in a great headspace, and I couldn't really concentrate and things like that. So yeah.
Mystery solved.
Apologies.
No, don't worry.
But
we should fight crime.
Yeah.
Putting out fires, left, right, solving mysteries.
I know. Creating mysteries and then solving them. I know.
Josie just said to me, she was like, I really enjoyed Kate's last episode about the man in the woods. She was like, I really enjoyed it.
Might, yeah.
Yeah. And then she said, what I really liked was the juxtaposition at the end. And she went, Kate immediately went, aliens. It was aliens. And I went, it's got to be some mechanics to do with the refrigerator.
Got to be some sort of breakdown and chemical leak. And I was like, aliens.
Aliens.
No doubt about it. Exact proof. There you go. I know.
That's just us, isn't it? I'm quite rational and logical. It must be some issue with the refrigerator system.
And I was like, must be some kind of issue with the universe. I know.
Well, that links nicely onto the actual episode that I'm doing today.
Oh.
Yeah, because I'm doing a weird one.
Oh, I like a weird one.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at Claire.
Yes.
It is a weird one.
But before we get into the episode, random blams. Go. So, because you had a random blam last week from your friend and said that this random blam, blah, 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 I got given a random blam as well.
Listening to the current episode, and I thought I'd give you my latest random blam. Google horseshoe crab and COVID vaccine. And now.
So she said, Google horseshoe crab and COVID vaccine.
I mean, that is what I heard, but then I thought maybe my dementia is kicking in again, and I've lost. Yeah, what?
Horseshoe crab and COVID vaccine.
Well,
so
right.
Obviously did Google horseshoe crab and COVID vaccine, and it turns out that they use the blood of the horseshoe crab to make the COVID vaccine.
I don't like that because I've had
And
it.
yeah, I know, but I think it's because the horseshoe crab is like one of the oldest surviving things, isn't it? It's like a living fossil. It's a super old thing. So perhaps that's why it's so good for us.
Well, in that case, I'm gonna put me Cockney and Essex isms book to the side, and I'll give you another random blam that is based on the horseshoe crab.
Oh, go on then.
I know, how impressive. And it's
I think I know
related
what
to
it's going to
horror.
be.
Do you?
Oh, is it that
And
it's
you
got
don't.
blue blood?
Oh no, but has
Oh,
it?
well, the horseshoe
Oh.
crab is the only thing that's got blue blood.
Oh my goodness! Horseshoe
Yeah.
crab episode. Horseshoe.
I'd never
Horseshoe.
even really heard of a horseshoe crab before the random blam got sent to me. But yeah, it turns
Alright.
out it's got blue blood because it's got it says it contains a copper-based respiratory pigment called hemocyanin.
Oh yeah, that. Oh yeah, like cyan, blue.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Oh,
And hemo like blood. Told you, mysteries.
oh my
We're
god,
so
we're
good at putting two and
blamming
two
all over
together.
the place today. Blam, 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 blam. My blam, based on the horseshoe crab, is in the film Alien. You know the face hugger?
Yeah, I know the face hugger.
That was made from a horseshoe crab.
Right.
Like the
Yeah.
the squishy
Outers.
bit. Yeah, the inners.
The innards.
Under the shell. It was made from one of those, and they kept it in the fridge, and they said that throughout like the first sort of 3 or 4 days it started to go really bad. So when the crew were going to the fridge to like get their lunch out, there was this old naked horseshoe crab in the fridge, and it was all like rotting and going disgusting. So there, blam.
Blam. That's really gross.
It is really gross. Yeah, I like it. All
right, well, random blam's done.
Done. I don't like too much natural light.
Like a vampire.
Yeah. I think
one of these episodes you're going to burst into flame.
I think we came to the agreement that I wasn't going to be a vampire. I am team werewolf. Sarah is team vampire along with Claire. Me and Josie, werewolf.
The pitch got thrown to us. What would you rather be, werewolf or a vampire? And I didn't fully understand the rules of it. So I was like, well, if I'm a vampire, can I change at will? Or if I'm a werewolf, can I change at will? Can I just change when I want to change? You know, what were the rules and regulations of becoming a werewolf? And I didn't get given any of those. So that's why I chose vampire.
I think we should go film related, like that kind of film rules. Let's go movie rules. So if you know, are out at night, obviously, being all like sexy and freezing and all that, and you suddenly thought, that guy over there looks delicious. Obviously, you could then like bring your fangs down, suck on him.
Right.
Have your feast, and then be done. But I mean, once you're a vampire, you're a vampire 24/7.
But I'm still a person. But I'm still a person.
You'd still be Sarah, but
yeah, but I wouldn't be like
black. You wouldn't be able to go out sunbathing,
right? But I wouldn't have to wear a cape.
You can wear what you want, love.
All right. Yeah, no, I think I'd rather be a vampire then.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm still very much werewolf. I enjoy the fuzziness of canines. So I would want to be fuzzy. I would want to be able to change at will. So if I thought, oh, I want to pop over to my mates, but I can't bother to drive because maybe I want to have a beer. So I'll just
werewolf mode activated.
Werewolf, yeah. And I just want to like wolf up and like leg it over there and be there in 5 minutes. And then and then change back and be like, hello, it's me.
Yeah. Or someone's giving you grief, like that farmer that gave me some grief, and I'd have just instantly gone wolf mode.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you wouldn't have, because you wouldn't be a wolf. You'd be a vampire, and so that would never have happened because you wouldn't have been out during the day because you can't.
Yeah.
And I still want to bask in the sun.
But also, if you've got yourself all dressed and ready to go to this party, and then you wolf mode, or you're going to rip out all your clothes, you're going to arrive naked.
I do understand that, but I'm planning to take like a wolf bag.
Oh.
Or maybe somewhere along the lines I can mix in some kangaroo DNA and I'll have like a furry pouch that I can put a pair of jeans in. And a t-shirt. I'm not an animal.
Yes, we didn't discuss it at quite at this length, did we? So
I thought now's the time.
All right,
now's the time. So you guys, let us know if you had to be a werewolf or you had to be a vampire. Which way are you going? Are you team cold, dead Sarah, or are you team warm, fuzzy Kate?
Thanks.
You chose it.
Yeah, but I didn't know I was going to be cold and dead looking. I thought I could just be me, but just drank a little bit of blood every now and then.
Would you be all right with drinking blood?
You know what? I need to think about this a bit more, and then I'll reconsider.
All right, let us know on the next one.
All right, and I'll have a list of reasons for and a list of reasons against.
All right, I too will bring up such a list. Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
Let's crack on.
Let's crack on, for God's sake. Morning.
You know what I was going to do there? I was going to beat you to it.
Jump in.
I was going to go, morning. And then that would have thrown everybody off, wouldn't it? What's going on?
What
podcast am I listening to?
I was listening to one of our podcasts the other day because, and I think I was playing something to Claire, and I was like, listen to this bit, because I think we're hilarious, and I was like, it's really funny, you should listen to it. And I was listening to it, and there was a bit in it where I thought, oh my God, we sound so similar. Just in this one bit, I couldn't work out or remember, obviously.
Oh, really?
Which one of us it was that was talking. And I was like, oh, we've merged.
Both talk shit.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. So anyways,
people
morning. People always ask, where do we get our stories from? Where do we hear our stories? And I want to tell you, we just make them up. Yeah, fuck it. Then nobody's coming at us about it not being factual. Yeah. So this story, I started off going, I really want to do a story about conspiracy theories.
Mm.
And I'd found some really good conspiracy theory about Elvis. And I was like, I was looking into all these conspiracy theories. And then while I was researching that, I found a few different things that caught my attention. And I was like, wait a minute, what's that?
Hang about.
What's that? So then I found a story about the Rougham Mirage.
Never heard of it.
Well, I know me neither. And I was like, what's that? So, done some research. So here it is. So, we've done stories before, ghost stories, haunted stories, things like that. And everybody knows about ghost houses. So, like houses that have got ghosts in and things like that. But have you ever heard of a ghost house?
I don't think so.
So, on a stretch of road between Bradfield St George and Rougham Green in an area of Rougham, which is in Suffolk, a stately home suddenly appears out of thin air and then vanishes just as quickly, leaving witnesses utterly perplexed.
What?
I know. So, Multiple witnesses going back 150 years have reported a very similar story. A rush of icy cold air and the sudden appearance of an elaborately grand red-bricked Georgian-style mansion with beautiful blooming gardens that vanishes just as quickly as it appears. So Rougham is a very beautiful little village situated in the countryside near Bury St Edmunds, which is on our doorstep.
Yeah.
And it has been populated for around 2,000 years. And the population currently stands at about nearly 1,800 people. But it's quite an old little village. There's a ruin of a Roman villa and burial chambers. There's a Roman road that's left exposed. There's 31 grade 2 listed buildings and 2 grade 1 Anglican churches that are protected. And Rougham is mentioned in the Doomsday Book.
Is it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Is it?
So it's quite an old historic location. And the first reported sighting of said pop-up mansion goes all the way back to 1860, when a gentleman by the name of Robert Palfrey was said to have been enjoying the last light of a June evening in the gorgeous fields of Rougham, when he suddenly felt an icy chill in the air, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, a large red brick house appeared, its gardens filled with summer blooms. That was his account of it. The next recorded site was some 52 years later in 1912. And perhaps by coincidence, I don't know, it actually was Robert's great-grandson, and his name was James Cobbold. And it said that he was riding a pony trap. And a pony trap is just a fancy word for a horse and cart. And he was riding around close to the village of Rougham with the local butcher, George Waylett, when suddenly both men felt the temperature rapidly drop. The horse began to panic and then reared up, and it threw George to the ground. And both men said that they heard a strange sound as if the air was being displaced. And before James could even comprehend what was going on or go to the aid of his friend that had just been thrown to the ground from his horse, a huge 3-story Georgian building and its gardens sprang up out of nowhere in what was just an empty field. In shock and disbelief, James stared at George, and as he did so, the house became enveloped in mist and then disappeared. So as James was like staring in disbelief, like, what on earth just happened? George kind of picked himself up off the floor, dusted himself down and said, "That's the 3rd time I've seen that happen now."
No.
And the next reported sighting happened in 1926, but wasn't recorded until 1934, when the witness, who was a school teacher named Ruth Wynne, she actually contacted a ghost researcher with her account of what she came across like 8 years previously. And this is her account. "I came to live at Rougham, 4 miles from Bury St Edmunds in 1926. The district was then entirely new to me, and I and my pupil, a girl of 10, spent our afternoon walks exploring it. One dull, damp afternoon, I think in October 1926, we walked off through the fields to look at the church of the neighbouring village, Bradfield St George. In order to reach the church, which we could plainly see ahead of us to the right, we had to pass through a farmyard, whence we came out onto a road." I love that. Whence.
Yeah.
Whence.
Points.
We had never previously taken this particular walk, nor did we know anything about the topography of the hamlet of Bradfield St George. Exactly opposite us on the further side of the road and flanking it, we saw a high wall of greenish-yellow bricks. The road ran past us for a few yards, then curved away from us to the left. We walked along the road, following the brick wall around the bend, where we came upon a tall, wrought iron gate set in the wall. I think the gates were shut, or one side may have been open. The wall continued on from the gates and disappeared around the curve. Behind the wall and towering above it was a cluster of tall trees. From the gates, a drive led away among these trees to what was evidently a large house. We could just see a corner of the roof above a stucco front, in which I remember noticing some windows of Georgian design. The rest of the house was hidden by the branches of the tree. We stood by the gates for a moment, speculating as to who lived in this large house, and I was rather surprised that I had not already heard of the owner amongst the many people who had called on my mother since our arrival in the district. My pupil and I did not take the same walk again until the following spring. It was, as far as I can remember, a dull afternoon with good visibility in February or March. We walked up through the farmyard as before and out onto the road, where suddenly we both stopped dead of one accord and gasped, "Where's the wall?" we queried simultaneously. It was not there. The road was flanked by nothing but a ditch, and beyond the ditch lay a wilderness of tumbled earth, weeds, mounds, and all overgrown with the trees which we'd seen on our first visit. We followed the road on round the bend, but there were no gates, no drive, no corner of a house to be seen. We were both very puzzled. At first, we thought that our house and wall had been pulled down since our last visit, but closer inspection showed a pond and other small pools amongst the mounds where the house had been visible. It was obvious that they had been there a long time. So just keep in mind that the lady said that they had seen a yellow and green wall, or greenish yellow bricked wall
that had been there a long time.
So they found the yellow and green brick wall and they followed it round and it led to this beautiful house. I also love how descriptive this woman is. All the men were like, "Fuck me, there's a big ass there, it's gone now." And then the woman was like,
"There it is, now it's gone." The women are like, "It had tiny wallflowers creeping along."
So yeah, that was obviously a really good descriptive story, whereas some of the other ones are just like, "I saw this house and then it was gone." But this is another story, and this one came in early 1940s. A gentleman by the name of Edward Bentley was delivering clothes catalogues for Auburn Davis, which I was like, "What's that?" So I looked it up, and it's a uniform shop in Bury St Edmunds, and it's actually still running to this day.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So as he and two colleagues drove down Southall Street, Edward spotted a large Georgian-style house set back from the road, and he thought, "Great, a big old house to deliver some catalogues to and try and get some potential sales." So he asked the driver to stop and then reverse back to the house so that he could go and deliver these catalogues. And when he looked back to the direction, say that go back to that house, it wasn't there anymore. So that, again, that was another man's description of.
So I was going to go to that house. Now it's gone.
Gone. Never mind.
Oh,
Carry on with me day. A few more sightings of the house appeared over the coming years. There was two young girls on separate occasions had seen this house, but by then it had kind of gotten a name for itself in the village. There was this ghost house that kept popping up. So these two young girls that had seen it pop up and disappeared, and then they'd run back screaming, "I've just seen the ghost house." So it doesn't really say when or anything that happened. But the most recent sighting of this house happened in 2007.
Oh.
And it's Jean Bartram and her husband Sydney had been out for a drive of the area, and when they drove past this gorgeous Georgian house on Kingshall Street, and the couple spoke about this house, this giant 3-story mansion building. They spoke about it, how elegant it was, how grand it was. "I wonder who lives there, blah blah blah." And then they'd both been looking forward to driving past it on the way home, and on their way home a few hours later, when they drove past it, they couldn't find it again, and she said that it was as though the house had disappeared. And it wasn't until a few years later she kind of just disregarded it. Yeah. She was like, "Oh, I must have driven down the wrong road. It must have, can't find it again." And that was it. But it wasn't until a few years later that she'd been reading this book called Ghosts of Suffolk, which it's a very old area. So there are a lot of, paranormal activity in the area of Suffolk. And she'd read this book, and it reminded her of this experience that she'd had about this ghost house. So then she got in contact with the East Anglian Daily Times to report her sighting. And she told the paper, I know I saw this house. I can see it now and could sketch it if I needed to. It was a lovely big Georgian house with a whole row of long windows and trees at the back of it. I've talked to other people and they have heard of it, and people in Rougham have heard of the tale, and I would just love to get to the bottom of it. So while these accounts vary slightly in detail and slightly in location, they're all quite similar, and they're all, the location that it was sighted in is all a very similar area. It's not like over there then all the way over there. It's all roughly the same sort of area. So the accounts caught the attention of, you know, researchers and things like that. So when people were researching about this ghost house, they found that early 18th century maps show a large house in the location where most of these sightings happened, and it possibly this giant house was called King's Hall, and which the lady said she found it on King's Hall Street. But they do say, though, because this map was early 18th century, that it would seem unlikely that this first sighting of it in 1860, they wouldn't have remembered that house. It was a very grand house. They would have known that it was there if it had recently been knocked down and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But researchers have also found fragments of green yellow brick wall in the location of the sightings, suggesting that a real house had once stood in that area where the ghost mansion appears. Now, there are several theories about Rougham's vanishing, reappearing house, and some believe that it's just a mirage. And a mirage is defined as an optical illusion. You know, a mistaking of the light of the rays of the sun and things like that. But to me, that doesn't really make sense.
No,
I don't think everybody's going to catch the same glimpse of a house in the same area. I don't know. But others believe that it could in fact be a prime example of a time slip. What's a time slip? I hear you ask.
What's a time slip, Sarah?
I'm so glad that you asked.
You're welcome.
So a time slip is a paranormal phenomena whereby ordinary people get a glimpse of the exact area they're in, but many years in the past. And these time slips could last seconds, minutes, hours, and who knows however long else. And maybe forever for some people. And one quote I found when I was researching said, "It's possible some people have slipped to the past and ended up stuck. Thousands of people go missing every year." And then I was like, that's real true.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. So, of course, I started doing some research into time slips.
Okay.
And my goodness.
Oh.
So, there are a gazillion different stories of people experience time slips all over the country. And many of them are in the Norfolk and Suffolk area. So some paranormal, I know. So that I could do a whole nother episode on time slips. But these are some of the stories that I came across. And so paranormal investigators speculate that time slips tend to happen in more ancient areas where intense events have occurred. And one such area is Bold Street in Liverpool. Now, if you look up time slips, the first thing that's going to come up is Bold Street in Liverpool. It seems to be a hotspot for time slips. So I'm going to share a few of the most compelling stories that I've come across so far. So prepare to have your mind blown.
Okay.
And so for some reason, Suffolk and Liverpool seem to produce these highly reported numbers of time slips. So I've got a few stories from both. But this one happened in Liverpool, and it was kind of the start of a a spark of different time slip stories. And people felt like if it could happen to this person, then they felt like they were more likely to be believed. So on Saturday, the 7th of July, 1996, an off-duty policeman named Frank and his wife Carol were in Liverpool doing some shopping. And they had been shopping for quite a lot of the day, and they decided that they would split up and do a little bit of shopping. So they got to Central Station, and then they decided Carol went to Dylan's bookshop in Bold Street to purchase a copy of Irvine Welsh's book, which was Train Spotting. And Frank went a different way, and he went to a record store in Rainlag Street to look for a CD. I apologise to everybody in Liverpool if I've got the names wrong, but I don't know how to pronounce it. So once he'd got to the record store, Frank got what he wanted, and then he decided to head back towards Dylan's bookshop to meet Carol. On his way there, he walked up the incline near the Lyceum, which leads on to Bold Street, when he suddenly noticed the absence of any noise. And he felt like he'd gone into this dead spot of just absolute quietness. When suddenly a small 1950s looking box van with the word Kaplan's emblazoned on the side sped right up to him, beeping its horn like absolutely wildly and swerving, and it narrowly avoided crashing into him. As a off-duty police officer, he was shocked and angry, and this car would have had to mount the pavement to get to where he was, and that's obviously a crime. So he got ready to do all his police thing when he noticed that he was actually standing smack bang in the middle of the road, and there was no pavement in sight. Across the road from where he was stood was Dylan's bookshop. However, it was no longer Dylan's bookshop. It instead had turned into Cripps. Understandably confused, he looked in the window of Cripps and saw no books on display, but women's handbags and shoes. The policeman turned around and saw that the people on Bold Street were wearing clothes that would have been in vogue in the 40s and 50s. He said that the men wore trilbies and long overcoats, and the women wore scarves, berets, pillbox and cartwheel hats, and most of the ladies also wore gloves. So it kind of dawned on him that he had somehow walked into the prehistoric Bold Street of 40 years ago. And amongst all of these historic people walking past, Frank managed to spot a girl that he said was probably about 20. And she looked like she was dressed in the clothes of someone of the mid-1990s, which is where he was from, where he'd just come from. She was wearing hipsters and a lime-coloured sleeveless top, and she carried a bag that had the name Miss Selfridge's on it.
Oh,
if that doesn't scream 1990s, I don't know what does.
I know. Yeah.
So he was like, right, I can't fully be in the past if there's a girl here that he knows is from the 90s. So he kind of smiled a little bit at the girl as she walked past him. And the girl, he said, looked just as confused, and she entered Cripps' shop. So Frank followed her in. And as he did so, the whole interior of the building changed in a flash to the interior of Dylan's bookshop. So he grabbed this girl by the arm at the entrance as they'd walked in, and he said, did you see that? And the girl calmly just kind of goes, yeah, I thought this was a new shop that had just opened, so I was going to look at the clothes, and now it's a bookshop. And so she just kind of like, oh, that's a bit weird.
That's a bit weird. Oh, well.
Yeah, gosh, well, I don't know what happened there, and then walked out again. And when Frank found his wife in the bookshop and sort of said to her about it, she said that nothing had changed. You know, she'd been in the bookshop, which was a bookshop. But Frank said he was really adamant that he had not hallucinated this whole entire episode. And he gave an account of this strange time slip on the Billy Butler show. And then within minutes of people hearing that, people were ringing in to say that in the late 50s and early 60s, there had been a store called Cripps in the exact location where Dylan's bookshop stood.
Wow.
Although Dylan's now is a Waterstones. But they also said as well that there had been a company or a firm called Kaplan's in existence at that time, which is what he saw written on the side of the van.
Yeah.
And then this in turn triggered a big response from other people that had reported similar experiences centered around Bold Street in that area. And they thought, like I said at the beginning, that if this policeman could come forward and be believed, then they could come forward and share their stories as well. And so while I was looking at other stories, I actually did find some information from, I don't know how true this was, but it was from a woman that claimed to be that 20-year-old girl that Frank had stopped. And she said, looking back, she absolutely wished she had spoken to him more about it. She said that she was very confused about what had happened and that it had turned from a closed store into a bookshop and she hadn't really kind of considered anything about it. But she wished she'd stopped and talked to him more. But that was just on the internet, so I don't know how true that was. But she said other information as well about different time slips that she'd experienced. But who knows?
That's crazy.
But so some of the other ones then that came forward, some were quite historic and that they'd happened in like the 90s, and some were happening recently. So this is a story of someone that it happened to recently. It was a young man named Sean who had been shoplifting in Liverpool in 2006. Right. And he'd got caught and he was legging it away from the security guard and he was running up the road, he said he headed down Hanover Street and he was trying to get rid of this guard that was chasing him. And he was 19 at the time. And as he kind of rounded the corner and entered a street called Brooks Alley, it was a dead end. And he was like, shit. You know, I'm at a dead end, you know, when you watch the films, they climb up and over the wall and shit. But he was like really out of breath and he stopped to take a minute and he felt this tightening of his chest, this like he could hardly breathe. And he was trying to understand what was it. He's a 19-year-old lad and he was like, I was quite fit. I'm good at running away from security guards, do it all the time.
Yeah.
don't know what was happening. And he realised that it kind of felt like the air had vanished around him. And as he was kind of struggling to get this breath, he waited for the guard to come round the corner and get him, but it never happened. So he thinking that, I must have given him the slip. You know, he must not have seen me go around this corner. So he kind of straightened up and he edged out of this little alleyway and peeping out and round the corner. And as he started walking back down Hanover Street, he realised that something was very different. The road looked different and so did the pavement. And he noticed that cars driving by looked very old-fashioned. And the roadworks that he'd just run past weren't there anymore. And he saw that the people walking around him were wearing strange clothes. And that's how he described it. So he crossed over the road to Bold Street and he noticed that the traffic lights that are normally there weren't there. And bushes growing around the Lyceum weren't there. There was a bar that should have been there that wasn't. And he carried on walking and realised that actually something was really, really odd. And then he began to panic. And he realised that somehow he had stepped back in time. And the time slip, it was kind of, for some people, it was only last seconds. But for others, it lasts a little while. And he'd known what a time slip was. And he was like, I don't want to be stuck here. And this was going on. It weren't sort of going away. So then he remembered that he had his mobile phone in his pocket. So he took it out and he tried to get a signal. But obviously there was no signal. So then he began to really panic. And what do I do? I'm like stuck in the past. And he spotted a kiosk selling newspapers and headed over. So he took a look at the newspaper that was on the stand. It was the Daily Post. And it stated that the date was the 18th of May, 1967.
Wow.
And then he was like, what do I do? What happens if I can't get back?
Yeah.
He's just going to be stuck there forever. What, like, his friends and his family aren't going to know where he's gone. So he decided to just carry on, just walk down the road. Then he sped up his pace a little bit, and he reached H. Samuels, the jewelers, and tried his phone once again. And this time it worked. So he then looked around and realized that he was back and everything was back to normal. But he said that the strange thing was that when he turned round to look down the street where he had just come from, he could still see people walking around that looked like they were from the 60s, like 1967.
Oh, really? Like some sort of echo?
Yeah. So,
Wow.
but Sean was like, oh, fuck this shit. And he literally dived onto the bus that was coming. He was like, I'm getting on this bus and I'm going home. And then he told his story to the local newspaper, and he stated this story 4 times. And each time it was exactly the same. The account matched every single time. And although most people felt that he was just making up this story to, you know, to get attention or whatever else. But when people actually interviewed the security guard that had been chasing him, the security guard said that he chased him down the road and he saw him go into this dead-end alley and he went in after him. And as he went in after him, Sean wasn't there. He'd completely disappeared. Wow. And when the newspaper checked out Sean's story about the shops that he'd seen and, you know, all the other things, they said that historically it was very accurate to what it would have looked like in 1967.
That's crazy.
Which is crazy.
Crazy.
So this next story happened to a woman named Linda on Bold Street around the late 90s. And this is her own account of it. And she says, I stepped out on Central Station next to the Lyceum and put my foot on the road to head across to Waterstones. In a split second, the scene changed, and a hansom cab went past me heading towards the cathedrals, followed by lots of people in what I can only describe as being like the people on the Quality Street tins. I'm hopeless. I'm hopeless at history, so I don't have a clue what era they were. That would be me. I'd be like, they look like something on the telly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't know where they were from. They're funny.
They looked very Downton Abbey like.
Yeah. It says it was the hats I noticed most as I tried to take in what I was seeing. The ladies wore bonnets with brims and the gents wore top hats and dark suits. Several couples walked straight past me as if they didn't see me. I immediately thought I must have walked into a film set, but there were no cameras about. And anyway, I couldn't have, because when I stood on the pavement, everyone was in the present time. Yet as soon as I stepped onto the road, everything went into a different dimension. At first I was confused and scared, and then just really scared as I thought about what could have happened to me if I'm unable to step back into the present time. So those were all the stories that were centered around Bold Street in Liverpool. And like I say, that's quite a famous, there were loads, absolutely tons of them, really loads. If you go on Reddit, there's tons of stories about time slips, and they're all very, very similar, and they're all around the same sort of area. Which is crazy. But this story is from an area in Merseyside, and it just says it's the lady, her name is Mrs. P, but it doesn't state when it was from. It says Mrs. P had recently moved to Thingwall in Merseyside. Her daughter was about 4.5, and she had taken a poorly turn. As it was a fine sunny day, Mrs. P decided to take her for a walk in the pushchair to give her some fresh air, and also to have a look at the area, which she didn't know yet. She went up Mill Lane, opposite the primary school. The lane she walked down was tarmacked, but the surface soon gave way to cobbles. As she walked along, she noticed a cottage on the right-hand side with an old chap leaning on the gate smoking a pipe. He wore a collarless shirt and had his sleeves rolled up. Mrs. P nodded to acknowledge him, and he nodded back. After this cottage, there was a row of whitewashed cottages with hanging baskets outside. On the left-hand side of the lane, there was a circle of country house flowers. Oh, it then says the name of the flowers, but I can't pronounce them.
That's all right.
To one side of the circle of flowers, there was a heap of sandstone. Behind this, there was a row of cottages. Alongside these, there was a stable block with an archway. Further on, there were more cottages, some built of stone and some built of cheap-looking brick. As Mrs. P walked along, she saw a lady dressed like Mary Ellen with a high neck blouse, shawl, and black long skirt. She did not appear to notice Mrs. P as she was hurrying into her house. As Mrs. P passed the house, she could feel the warmth from the fire in the range inside. At the end of the lane was a 5-bar gate, and a little girl was sitting on it. At the time, the programme Little House on the Prairie was popular on the television, and Mrs. P thought how the child was dressed in a similar fashion, as was popular with children at the time. However, Mrs. P noticed that as well as a dress and a pinafore, the child was wearing button boots, and she thought this was odd, as modern children never went as far as wearing old-fashioned items like this. The little girl gave her a funny look, then jumped off the gate and ran into the cottage. Mrs. P walked up to the 5-bar gate, and behind was a grassy slope leading to a meadow. And she decided that as this was the end of the lane, she would just turn back around and take her daughter back home. And as she walked back down the lane, the man leaning on his gate was still there, and they both acknowledged each other again with a nod to him, nod to her. Mrs. P then went home, and she described to her mother how she had just found this old part of Thingwall and how pretty it was. A couple of months later, the opportunity arose for Mrs. P to take her mother to see the same cottages. However, when they arrived, the path was no longer cobbles, it was all tarmacked and paving slabs. The cottage where the man had been leaning on the 5-bar gate was now boarded up and almost derelict. The stone cottages had gone, replaced by 2 semi-detached houses. The circle of flowers and the stable block had also vanished, and at the end of the lane, the 5-bar gate no longer existed, and the dip down that had been toward the meadow was now an estate of bungalows. So Mrs. P remarked that whilst houses were built quick nowadays, there was no way the entire area could have changed so dramatically in just a few months. Jeez. About 8 years later, Mrs. P was involved in a dispute about a footpath. Her solicitor suggested that she should obtain the 1830 title map of the area and check the footpath on that. After some difficulty, she did manage to locate this map, and she was surprised to find that the buildings on the map at that time matched exactly the buildings that she had seen that day when she'd taken her daughter for a walk. And the pile of rubbish that she had seen had been the remains of Thingwall Mill, which had been destroyed in a hurricane.
Oh.
And that one's a strange one. Again, that was another account from a woman, so it was very detailed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's interesting is that they have noticed her and they're acknowledging her presence, and that happened with the man and the car as well, that he beeped him, and so it's almost like it's that time period was still going on when they went there.
Yeah, which makes me wonder about, because this was something that I wanted us to cover at some point anyway, but I get fascinated by these pictures that you see.
So that was
hush my mouth.
Hush your mouth. So I was going to include those because there is a very famous picture of a woman using a mobile phone in I think it's something to do with Charlie Chaplin movie.
Yeah, something.
It was the release of a Charlie Chaplin movie, and there was a photo taken, and it looks like a woman was talking on a mobile phone.
Yeah.
When I done some research on that, people are saying that it could have just been a hearing aid that she was like a new type of hearing aid that she was sort of listening to or whatever. And then there's another one as well of a man, and he's surrounded by all old, looking people with their hats on and their, suits and whatever else. And he's wearing a jumper and sunglasses.
Yeah.
But when I looked that one up again, it says that the jumper was just a sports jumper of that time period, and the sunglasses were sunglasses of that time period. It's just he looked very out of place amongst
Yeah.
everybody else.
But and there's another one where there's, I think, a man and he's got trainers on,
Right.
and in the background is like Abe Lincoln, and like I think there's like soldiers and things there, and this man's just sort of casually walking along, and it looks like he's got modern day trainers on.
Mm.
But who's to say that he didn't just walk into a time slip as
Mm.
that picture was being taken? And
Yeah,
then when they
absolutely.
sort of thought, let's ask him about these shoes that he's wearing or something, he was gone.
Gone again. Yeah, the same with the supposedly
Mad.
woman with the cell phone.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a lot of them. There's a lot of these
mhm.
photos where these people just look really out of place, or part of them looks out of place. Like
Yeah.
you say, they've got sunglasses on, or trainers, or shoes that didn't exist at that time.
Mhm.
Who knows? Maybe these people were stuck there.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
they went into a time slip and they could,
Couldn't get
I
out
don't know.
again.
Yeah, they could find a top and some trousers that were current to that age, and they thought, I'll have to go and see if I can get some shoes so I can fit in.
But that again, that could be how technology advances, couldn't it? Because if someone's got
Yeah.
stuck there and they're all like,
Yeah.
or and how fashion advances as well. That could be.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just it's a mind-boggling thing to think about, isn't it? You
So
get stuck in that
perplexing.
little time loop. But
Yeah.
I've got one more story for you.
Oh, good.
And this story happened right where I live in Kings Lynn.
Oh.
And Kings Lynn, we need to do the tour because it's a very old historical town and there's lots of paranormal history about it. There's ghost tours around the square, and they used to be like witch burnings on the square. It's called like Tuesday Marketplace. That's where they used to do the witch burning and stuff.
Oh, goodness.
So there's a lot of history there. And so, you know, and they said that time slips happen in areas that have a lot of this sort of history. So this one was emailed in anonymously to a website called Uncanny UK.
Oh.
And there is actually if you go onto YouTube, there's some episodes of Uncanny, and there's an episode around the Liverpool Bold Street time slips as well.
Oh, cool.
But this email says, I just wanted to report my time slip experience, which was experienced by myself, my father, and my sister. It happened in the late 1990s in Kings Lynn, Norfolk. My dad, sister, and I were in the town to send my sister off on the train, and we were passing the time standing by a fence near the railway station from which one could see a road and roundabout ahead. It was about noon, and we had no agenda at that time other than to wait before heading to the station, and there was a lull in the conversation. We were all casually looking straight ahead when suddenly the atmosphere changed. The sound of the traffic around us stopped abruptly, as if someone had literally turned the volume right down. The air seemed to change too. It became very still, spookily still, and no sound could be heard. None of us spoke. He then goes on to describe what he saw. Then there came the sound of horses' hooves on the road, and within a few seconds we saw a horse and cart driven by a large, angry-looking man dressed in what I estimate to be 18th century clothing. He was a very rough, dirty appearance, and his cart was well used. He drove the cart around in a circle, all the time staring at us, sometimes directly at us, sometimes away, but looking absolutely furious, as though he was looking for someone he wanted to kill. His face was red with hatred, and he was a big, rough-looking man, someone you would definitely not want to cross. Eventually, he turned the horse and cart round and drove it off down the same road from which he had appeared, and we could hear the horse's hooves disappearing in the distance. As quickly as it happened, the family found themselves by the side of the busy road, watching traffic speed past them again. He said, immediately, the sound of the horse's hooves was gone, the atmosphere changed back again, and the sound of modern traffic and the din of a modern town returned. We all three looked at each other, shaken and almost disbelieving, but once we'd asked the inevitable, did you see that? And received the answer, yes, we were even more shaken. It was such a peculiar experience and one I shall never forget.
Goodness.
So my question was, because we started with the Rougham Mirage and then we ended with time slips. So
Yeah.
do we think that the Rougham Mirage is a time slip? Do we think that it's a ghost that, you know, a ghost house that just appears like a ghost would?
I personally think it's a time slip.
Yeah.
I think it's some kind of like echo of
But if it's
the
an
purpose
echo,
of it, I don't know.
if it's an echo, if a time slip is an echo, why do they see you? Why do they interact with you? It can't be an echo.
Because it's time, isn't it? It's not like it's a time echo, not so much just a something that like used to be. I mean, echoes are echoes because they reverberate off of things that are present. So you
I see.
you get a sound that happened. So you're standing on the other side of the canyon and you say, "Hey." So as soon as you finish saying, "Hey," that is in the past. That's
Yeah.
happened. The echo then reverberates off of everything and then gets to me and becomes
You're
present.
present.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. What baffles me is that people said the same sort of thing. The sound
Yeah.
became very still and the sound changed, or the air felt very different. And
Yeah.
so that's quite a, you know, quite a thing to experience, that all of that kind of changes. And
I mean, I like to think that things like that exist.
I would love to experience a time slip just to see what it looked
Love
like.
it.
But
Love it.
when they said people can get stuck in a time slip and that people just disappear, I was like, oh my goodness, that happens.
Yeah. I would have to really I would really struggle with myself whether or not if I had the option of coming back or staying there, it would be a real struggle for me because I miss my mum and dad.
Yeah.
So I know that wherever I was, if I went into a time slip and they said, well, you can stay, you just need to not go down that alleyway again or something like that, I'd be like, do you know what? Get me to my mum and dad.
Yeah. But butterfly effect. You
I
go back in
know.
time, you change something. It's
I know.
like,
I think I'd have to see them if
yeah.
that would be like my chance to just go and see, especially if it was like 1967. They'd like I'd love to have seen my mum and dad in like in the 60s, like before like me and my sisters were born. That would have that would have been wicked.
Yeah. But I'd love to, you know, we've got tons of listeners, so I'd love somebody out there must have experienced a time slip. So
Yeah.
let us know. But there are so many accounts of time slips. So
Yeah. Well, the thing is, there could be millions more. We could have already experienced some kind of time slip, but maybe it wasn't obvious enough. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I didn't even know that was a thing. I had never heard of a time slip before. So when I looked it up, I was like,
I want to see that.
I'm gonna go walking around King's Lynn now every day.
Yeah. Get your butt out there and start walking around.
Yeah.
I'm going to start carrying some like old money with me. And then when I go in a time slip, I could just buy a whole load of land.
Well, absolutely. Another one of these stories that I didn't include was about a young girl that I think it was in Bold Street. She'd gone into a shop and there was all like really old vintage baby clothes, and she was like, oh, these are so cute, and she went around picking up all these really cute vintage baby clothing, and when she got to the till and whipped out her card to pay, they was like,
what? What are you
that?
doing?
We don't take them. Like, what is that? So she was like, oh, that's rubbish. I don't have any cash on me. So she had to leave it all. And then when she went back to her mum, she was like, that used to be like whatever shop it was. That's not there anymore. And it turns out that wasn't there anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it like the same kind of era that people go back to, or is it always completely different?
What, the same person or different people, like
Different
experience
people.
of time?
Like, what do you know? What kind of like time difference they are normally, or
No.
like, does
I don't-
anyone ever like report that they walked around the corner and there was like a fucking T-Rex in front of them? Like that. And they were like, oh shit, and
Well, this one was from the 18th century. Some of them are from the 1960s, So who knows?
I guess in that case, because I'm thinking, what sort of currency should I start carrying around? But yeah, I mean, just gold, I would have thought. I could
Who knows?
whip off some of my jewellery and sell that, buy a load of land, walk back down the alleyway, boom, millionaire.
Well, I don't know if it works that way, but
Well,
if
I'm
it
going to
does,
try it.
let me know.
If it does, I'll buy your house.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And then I'll phone you and go, by the way,
I want all that interest.
I own your whole village. And I want back
You've got a
payment.
castle.
Yeah. I'll be in my castle with my moat.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that'd be
all right.
wicked.
Well, that's the story.
Oh, that's a great episode. I love talking about that and hearing about that. That's wicked. I'm going to be in a daydream state all day now.
Thinking about your castle.
Yeah, love my castle.
What you could buy. Yeah. All right then.
Madness. All right. Well, yeah. If our listeners can get in contact and let us know if they've experienced time slips, that would be great, because I'm really, really interested in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wicked.
All
Good
right.
episode, Poddy.
Thanks very much. We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.